Always great catching up with my next guest, Brandon Gibson, the man who is helping Jon Jones get ready for his fight. Of course, he won that fight, UFC 309, taking out Stipe Miocic. Brandon, how you doing, man? How are you?
Doing great. Good to see you again, James. Thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for making time, Brandon. It's great to talk to you, and what a win that was. And a lot of things going into this fight, obviously, with Jon having a bit of the layoff. They've been trying to book this fight and put it together, and just a lot of noise going into the matchup. How did Jon keep his composure as someone who was with them all week? Because there were a lot of distractions.
Jon's just such a seasoned vet when it comes to every part of this game. And sometimes I tell that to young fighters, right? It's not just about the fight alone. There's so many other commitments and obligations, especially as you grow in the sport. And to see Jon handle like Tuesday media day or Wednesday media day, he did like 13 straight hours of media just flawlessly. And I would be so exhausted, but he did it, went right into a hard training session, like no problem. So there's so many little elements that make Jon great. So it's real easy to keep him focused and on track, and never taking his eyes off the real goal, the real mission.
Did the fight play out to your expectations? I mean, obviously you game plan for Stipe to beat him and all that, but in terms of how the fight played out, was it pretty accurate to how you thought it would go?
I think we did a really good job defensively preparing for Stipe's strengths. What I will say I was surprised about was Stipe's ability to just absorb punishment. Like I thought in the first round, Jon was so close to finishing with that ground and pound. We could feel Herb Dean hovering over, getting ready to make the call. But man, Stipe is resilient, and he got up at the end of that first round and shook it off and walked back to his corner just fine. I was impressed, and I knew at that point too that he was going to come out hard for the second round, which he did. But I was very impressed with Jon's performance. I thought not just defensively he did well, but letting his offense go in orthodox stance and southpaw stance. We got to see Jon's boxing. We got to see his great kicking skills, and we were able to see that amazing Osotogari reap trip in the first round and the great ground and pounding control. So Jon was able to really showcase a full mixed martial arts technique display.
Yeah, and which culminated obviously in the great finish and all that. Take me through that moment where Jon wins the fight. He's doing the Trump dance. He sees Trump. Like that must have been kind of a surreal moment, as obviously like everything sort of played out, I'm sure, in slow motion.
Well, that's exactly the adjective I've been using all week to describe it. It was surreal. The whole moment was surreal. It's been a long camp. I was able to just take a moment there on my little corner stool and soak up the atmosphere, the environment, the moment, because it was a lot of work to get there, and not just for this camp, right? Like we've been working with Jon since 2009, so a long road, lots of trials and tribulations, and a lot of success to get there. And I just do my best in those little moments to soak it up when I can, because those moments don't come every day. And to have President Trump there and Elon Musk, and look in the crowd and see so many stars. Sometimes it's surreal, and prior to the fight, you can't be distracted by it, any of that. And then, after the victory, it's kind of cool to look around and enjoy it.
Yeah, well, that's good. I'm glad you got to soak it up. And by the way, I should mention you have a day job, so like after all this happens, you have to go back to like the regular working world. Is that something? I mean, I'm sure you're used to it now, but is that still like kind of interesting that you kind of live these two different lives?
I think it's good for me. It keeps me humble, keeps me grounded. And the jobs complement each other in so many ways. Like I wouldn't be such a great coach if it wasn't for my government work. And I don't know if I'd be as good as my government work if it wasn't for my coaching experience. So I'm just grateful that everybody's like understanding and supports my dreams in both of the worlds. So yeah, it was good to go right back to my day job and get right back in it, helping everybody, and not linger on the celebration too long.
And I imagine, because you've been doing this so long, this must have felt like a bigger fight, because everyone was talking about Jon Jones on Saturday. Like, what was it like going back to work and then just seeing, because I'm sure there's some fight fans that you work with.
Yeah, it's always good to feel everybody's like support and excitement and enthusiasm when I was just back to Albuquerque. So, the town's really behind Jon, and he's a staple in our community, and everybody was cheering for him. So, it was good. It was good, but I'm try to be a humble man, and I'm just grateful for Jon's victory. We thank God for that victory, and just right back to work.
As his coach, obviously he came out. There's more Jon Jones left to be seen in the octagon because obviously he alluded to it there. They gotta work something out as far as the next fight. As his coach, I'm sure you would like to see him back in there a little bit sooner. It was a bit of a layoff, and that's mainly due to the opponent and everything like that. But when would you like to see him get back in there if you could sort of pick and choose when he would have his next fight?
Well, yeah, James, I think I think he's the greatest martial artist on the planet. So, if he wants to compete, great. But also there's a big part of me that like if they can't come to terms on a negotiation or a deal, like I'm also just fine with that being Jon's last performance.
Yeah.
Uh, and I know Jon is too, like to be able to be in New York at Madison Square Garden with that incredible crowd, with such a dominating, devastating performance against one of the all-time greats. That's also one we can we could ride off into the sunset on. So, and I also have no problem with Jon taking breaks. Like we've seen Jon with long layoffs, and ring rust isn't really something that affects him. He actually thrives when there's an extra long camp, and we're students of the game, and we just continue to study and evolve our game plan every chance we get, and have a great team around us. So the brotherhood, the camaraderie, the culture we've built is really cool. So, we'll see what shakes out.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Jon could have just walked off in the sunset, and that, did it almost surprise you in a way that he didn't just retire right then on the spot just because of what he has accomplished?
I don't, I don't think that moment in the octagon with a career like Jon's is the moment where you decide that.
Okay.
I think a lot was predicated on how the fight with Stipe was going to go. And, thank God we didn't have any injuries. He's in great shape and great spirits. And, he'll always be a martial artist as well. So even if Jon never fights again, much like George St. Pierre, I'm sure you'll always see him training in videos and sharing his knowledge as well.
Jon wants to fight Alex Pereira. He was very vocal about that during the media week. Just looking at that fight stylistically, obviously no one's been able to take Pereira to the ground. How do you look at that fight with Jon and Alex? If Alex was to move up, I'm assuming, because obviously I don't think Jones will go back to light heavyweight.
I think they both walk around at similar weights. I don't know if Jon would ever go back down to 205. He could if he chose to. But man, I think that's a great stylistic matchup. Pereira has such dynamite in his hands and with his kicks. Incredible pressure, championship just mentality, and to see what he's accomplished and the streak he's been on is something that has us excited to go and try to figure out and solve that puzzle. But Jon brings so many tools to the table. I think it's more challenging for another team instead of coaches to try to solve the riddle, the problem that is Jon Jones.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And then I got to ask, just because everyone was mentioning it before, Tom Aspinall, just looking at what Jon brings to the table, and Tom's also very dynamic, very well-rounded. How do you look at a fight between those two?
Aspinall's a great interim champ. He's had a great heavyweight career so far. I think there's still a lot of unknowns, which, could be a benefit to Tom, but also a lot of those unknowns could be a big benefit to us. Like, how is he going to do in deep water? How is he going to do in later rounds? There'll probably be a lot of pressure on him to try to start fast. So with all of that said, Tom's not a matchup. Like, we have respect for all of these great opponents and great champions, but I think Jon has solved a lot more complex problems. And I think just Jon's mixed martial arts game, his IQ, his pace, his strength would all land in our favor, and Jon victorious once again.
And got to ask this as well. I know you and Jon are not the same person, but Jon has sort of alluded to the fact that he thinks that Tom needs to prove a bit more if they want to have a fight with him. Do you share that same sentiment? Do you feel like he needs to do a bit more if he wants to fight Jon?
I won't comment on that. Jon last fight week was saying a lot of things too. He wasn't sure if he wanted to do business with Tom whatsoever. And whereas Pereira really has Jon's respect and his admiration, and Jon wants to do business with a guy like that. So, it's not my job to match make or pick the opponent. It's my job to game plan and prepare Jon once we have a contract bout signed. So, I'll leave those dynamics up to Jon and the UFC. I'll just be ready, when we get a call for another rodeo.
What would you like to see Jon do if he does in fact retire here pretty soon? Is coaching some? I mean, obviously he's an anomaly. Like we haven't seen a fighter like Jon in I would say in MMA history. Do you think him just possessing those different set of skills would translate well into coaching? Do you see that a future for Jon after this?
100%. Jon is his IQ for mixed martial arts is just off the chart. It's off the chart, and he's such a good team leader and captain. And what we've really been able to build around Jon the last 3 years is a testament to, not just the talented coaches that come through, but Jon's leadership, Jon's coaching ability. And we had a lot of incredible talent on our mats this camp, from Joseph Parker to Gordon Ryan to Gable Stevenson, and a whole crew of high quality, high caliber men that were helping us prepare. And Jon wants to keep that group going. So I could definitely see Jon continuing to coach. I think Jon could be a world championship coach, just like we've seen Khabib do with his career.
Yeah.
He has a lot of information to share, a lot of great energy to give. And I mean, who better to have in your corner than Jon Jones? So, if when the time comes that he wants to make that full transition, I think Jon's going to be an incredible coach.
Love it. It's good to hear.
Give back to the game that gave so much to him.
Well said. I just want to ask you one more thing about UFC 309. A lot of people are talking about Bo Nickal's performance over Paul Craig. I know you were, laser focused on Jon's fight, but did you get a chance to watch it? Because a lot of people were not too happy with how Bo fought Paul Craig.
No, sometimes the fans get to see glimpses into the locker room, and they'll see the TV on with the fights going. As we were there preparing Jon, we actually turned all the TVs off. So I didn't get to watch Oliveira and Chandler or Nickal and Craig. I think that's just stylistically a matchup where, Bo has such great wrestling and Craig has such great jiu-jitsu that sometimes those pros turn it into a striking match. And sometimes if they're not well-polished strikers, it can be a little lackluster.
Yeah.
So yeah, styles make fights.
Just my last question before we get out of here. And again, I appreciate the time as always. As far as like other fighters you're working with, I know Aaron Pico, like just kind of give people a little bit of a glimpse of anyone that you're working with or any fights you got coming up, anything like that. Cause I know you do more than just coach Jon Jones. You have obviously other fighters you work with too.
James, I mean, there was a time in my career where I trained a lot of UFC fighters, and a big list of Hall of Famers that, for some reasons, guys like Carlos Condit, retired. Some of the guys moved on from Albuquerque, like Andre Arlovsky or Alistair Overeem. Some I parted ways with, like Cowboy Cerrone. But what I've really found that works best for me and for my family and just my coaching style the past couple of years is like a real small team. So, the past year, really, I've only worked with Jon Jones and Aaron Pico. Okay. And nice. Pico's been on a great tear, and I just like being able to give like my all to the fighters and more than just a coach-fighter relationship, but, be truly like brothers. And so Pico, we're just patiently waiting. We've kind of expected since like last February that we'd be challenging for the Bellator Championship against Pitbull. And things are moving really slow, things that are out of our control. But we're just staying focused on becoming better martial artists every day. So Pico's still training hard. He's growing. His IQ for the game is growing. His well-roundedness is growing. And, we're just staying on it.
Love it. Brandon, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great holiday season. I'm sure it's some well-deserved time off, I would think. If there's anything you want to mention before we get out of here, sponsors, well, you don't have sponsors, but any social media or anything you want, or maybe you do have sponsors. There we go. Either way, I'll give you the last word here, sir.
I think our teams are just grateful for all of the support, right? Like the great training partners that helped Jon Jones this camp, all the great coaches that sacrificed and came in, and it was just a really cool experience to be a part of. And, I am one of the few coaches fortunate to have some great sponsorships, and shout out to Monster, especially for all of their support.